One of the most important and misunderstood pieces of the thoroughbred rehoming puzzle is the way a horse will react physically to a new environment and in particular to new feed. Equine Nutritionist Rebecca Ham has some great information to help rehoming your thoroughbred, including making sure their food and water requirements are up to scratch. Rebecca, you obviously have an extensive background with thoroughbreds. Tell me, a little bit about the work that you've done and what you've learned over the years about this incredible breed.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably thoroughbreds are one of my favourite horses, to be honest, and I particularly have a passion for these off-the-track horses. So very privileged to be able to work with them, and obviously working with Racing Victoria as well, so in that off-the-track program.
Well, you graduated from Charles Sturt University with a degree in equine nutrition. You taught at NMIT in Melbourne. You're now with Kentucky Equine Research. Explain some of the work you've done and some of the work you currently do with Kentucky Equine.
After graduating from CSU in 2006, I actually knew that I wanted to work for KER, so I'm very lucky that I've been able to fulfil one of those goals in a nutritionist type role. So yeah, certainly very, very lucky from that point of view. Day to day, in terms of the role that I have at the moment, so it's pretty flexible. So we deal with every sort of horse owner. It can be from people with ponies, with weight problems, can be off-the-track network, can be racehorse trainers, can be breeders. Veterinarians is a big part of the role that we take care of, looking at clinical nutrition. So it is very varied, and one of the big things that I do is a lot of education. Still drawing back on that education experience and teaching experience in TAFEs and universities. So that's probably the biggest part of my role, to be honest.
But Elanide has been driven through along the fence. Elanide grabs a lead.
And you have a beautiful off-track thoroughbred, Elanide. He's by More Than Ready from Alanud, so he's a half-brother to a champion 2-year-old and now stallion Pride of Dubai. He was a stakes winner. He won over $100,000. How did you come to have this gorgeous horse?
So he actually came through a friend of mine. So he was trained by Mick Price, and Carolyn actually got in contact and said he might be a good option for me. So came across him a couple of years ago, and then I actually had a bad horse injury, so he sat in the paddock for 12 months before I could really get on him and do anything with him.
So what are some of the factors in feeding a horse who has just retired from racing? I mean, obviously their metabolism is still running at high speed, so they kind of churn through their feed without a lot of the goodness staying in them. What do you really need to look at, and focus on when you get a horse straight off the track?
Yeah, so I mean, probably your general health checks is probably the most important thing. So everything from dental, parasites, gut health is a big thing for off-the-track thoroughbreds. So getting that organised and checked out to know where you start from is probably the best option. Then from there, usually we always have fibre as the most important part of a ration. So it's very different for a horse that's come out of a training environment, that's been in a stable, predominantly probably on a more high grain ration than what a performance horse would be. Their digestive tract has adapted to utilising those nutrients, and they change the horse's microbiome or the bacteria in the horse's hindgut. So when horses first come off the track and they go through that transition period, their metabolism is working very, very fast, and it's set up to utilise the carbohydrates in the grains that are being fed. But when we actually want them to transition into a performance horse and we don't need that high energy intake all the time, it takes a little bit of time for their digestive tract to reset almost, and train those microbes, develop those microbes to break down fibre. A lot of the times, and one of the biggest questions and challenges that we come across is when we just turf a horse out into a paddock because they don't necessarily eat a lot of pasture, and any pasture or hay that we give them, those microbes aren't well equipped to digest and extract calories from. So we need to give that time, and that's not something that happens overnight. There's no set timeline for that, but that's probably the biggest challenge that we come across. that we need to jump that hurdle before we can even look at giving them a different bucket of feed.
So it's not just that they're picky eaters, is it? I mean, they really do need a really, balanced approach to how you're going to feed this horse so that that condition doesn't drop off too dramatically.
Yeah. So because their metabolic rate is quite high, if we don't give them enough calories in those first few months after racing, they do drop more weight. So, combining that fibre along with a feed that we usually go with a high fat, high fibre content, but keeping in mind that they can be a little bit suspicious of new feeds. They're used to usually a sweet feed or a grain, so just giving them pellets is usually not the best option. Sometimes they experience a bit of neophobia, they experience not wanting to consume new foods. Putting some sweet feed is a really great trick into the mix. If you're not going to be feeding it long term, that is fine, but transitioning them slowly. And certainly introducing any new feeds over that sort of 7, 10, 14-day period is advisable anyway. One of the goals we have when we're trying to feed an off-the-track horse is obviously weight gain. So there's lots of different options that we've got available to us. So hay, lucerne hay is going to be higher in energy than a grass hay. Then selecting an appropriate feed. So a sweet feed is a good option. The horse is likely to be used to eating that and is very, very yummy for them. Then you can go to a pellet or a cube if you like, and if you need to increase the energy density and the calories in the ration to encourage weight gain without making the meal sizes really, really large, then a stabilised rice bran like this one here is really useful in order to do that.
And a lot of, you touched on it before, a lot of race horses have ulcers and other problems in their gut. What should someone taking on a retired racehorse look for, and what treatments are the best for that?
Yeah, so certainly the gold standard is to get the horse scoped. Doing a gastroscope where you'll actually put a camera down into the horse's stomach is the best way to look and see what is actually going on. Otherwise, really, it's a guess, best guess. The stomach is divided into two parts, and the upper portion is where the majority of those ulcers do occur. But the ones that occur in the lower portion of the stomach, or the glandular portion, they can be quite a lot trickier to actually resolve. So knowing what you're dealing with allows you to then treat, usually with an omeprazole-based drug. There's lots of different brands available, and then you can use supplements and other things long term. But certainly gut health is, particularly ulcers, is one thing that nutrition does play a big role in. If you're trying to treat ulcers but you're still feeding a very high starch feed, or if the horse is fasting for a long period of time and not consuming adequate forage, you're on a bit of a mouse wheel. So certainly resolving that is important with nutrition as well in mind.
And water is another really big thing. I mean, horses are used to, in the racing stables, the water's pretty much constantly on tap. What do you advise people to make sure the horse is getting enough fluids?
Yeah, and this is probably one of the big questions that we do get, because when horses do, as you say, come out of a racing stable, they do usually have the small automatic waterers in their boxes. When we put them into a more relaxed equestrian or rehoming environment, they might go into a paddock with a different water source, and horses are very suspicious of new things, and water is one of them. If it smells different, if it tastes different, they're not likely to drink it well. So having that in a big water trough, it's difficult then to monitor individual intake, and that can be problematic. So reduced water intake can cause things like impaction colic or dehydration colic. So we do want to try to monitor that water intake as best we can when we take them to a new property or give them a new home. The other thing to consider is if you put them into a herd environment, which they may not have been in since they were sort of at stud. So once again, you can't monitor that individual horse's water intake. You don't know if they're drinking out of that dam, if they're being bullied and kept away from that water source or the feed source. So that's something to definitely consider, and seasonal variations. So during winter, particularly at the beginning of winter, it is there's a big high risk time where horses do have a spike in impaction colics. They prefer water somewhere between 7 and 20 degrees. So when it drops, they don't drink particularly well, and you can experience some impaction colics and things like that then as well.
And also with the herd environment, I mean, there is an issue. I've seen my rehomed ex-race horses drop a lot of condition in a paddock with a pony or another breed because they guzzle all their feed. I mean, it really is important to make sure, you know, even not so much even the bullying, they just eat faster sometimes.
Absolutely, and it really is a bit of a challenge. So our standard recommendation for any horse that you're trying to put weight on or that's got a special supplement or something in the feed is to remove them from that herd environment whilst you give them the hard feed at least. If you've got a situation where you don't have a lot of grass and you're relying on hay being fed out, then that's a little bit more challenging. Just make sure that you put more piles of hay or more feeders out than there is horses in the paddock. That's always a good trick. So if you've got, you know, 7 horses in the paddock, put out 8 or 9 feeders or 8 or 9 piles of hay, so at least they've got somewhere to try and go to. My go-to advice would be ask a reputable source for information. Certainly do your homework. It can be really tricky to plough through all of the marketing information available on websites or social media platforms. So having a conversation with someone so you can get actually individual advice is probably what I would recommend more than anything, and certainly what customers find most useful. We do virtual consultations as well, so we will use platforms like Zoom where we actually get a visual on the horse, we get a visual on the owner, their feed sources, their different types of hay, so we can be very specific in the advice that we provide.
They are an incredible breed, aren't they, the thoroughbred? It really is worth getting it right for the great joy and the athleticism and the fun you can have with these wonderful horses.
Absolutely, they're so versatile, and I think the off-the-track horses, you know, do have a wonderful life ahead of them when they finish racing. So I think setting them up well as soon as they're off the track, resolving any problems they may have had during racing, whether it's gut health, whether it's muscle issues, setting them up for success in jumping, dressage, whatever you want to do with them later in life.